Hello and welcome to Course 3, Advanced Lessons in CodeJumper. This is Lesson 11, Selection and Random. In this lesson, students will be able to develop programs that use selection and random values. So all students will be able to describe what a random value is. Most students will be able to create a program using selection and random values. And some students will be able to create a program using selection, random values, and loops. All right, so we always start out with our key vocabulary. So we've already seen selection. This one we saw in the last lesson, lesson 10, and that is a structure in computer programming where if a question is asked, the program decides what to do next based upon the answer. This is that if-else statement that we were learning about last time. And then our other vocabulary word is a random value. And a random value is a value that changes in a computer program depending upon the possible outcome of the program sequence. So say we're rolling a die. We know the outcomes are 1 through 6 because each face of the die has a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 on it. So that's where we're going to start with our unplugged activity. So really diving into those concepts before we get our hands on the CodeJumper kit. So the objective of the unplugged activity is to really get those ideas of what a selection structure using a random value is in computer programming, and then they will apply it to their own program. So again, that random value, so that vocabulary, the value chosen by chance from some specified group of values. The value is not known until it has been generated. So what we're going to do with this one, we are going to have all the students have a set of 5 dice, tactile dice or traditional dice. Either one works depending on the needs of your student, and the random value counting page, which is available at the end of the lesson. And there's an example of how to set it up. It doesn't necessarily need to be set up exactly how we have it set up. Okay, so on the screen now, we have that random value table. The header row is all the player numbers 1 through 4. So we have player number 1 number of rolls, player number 2 number of rolls, player number 3 number of rolls, and player number 4 number of rolls. And then our rows are each game. So we have game 1, game 2, game 3, and game 4. And each game has the game number and the value. So this is the way it works is each player has those 5 dice in a little bag, and preferably one that can't be seen through. And they shake it up, and one player gets to choose the number that they're looking for, say number 3. And then everyone rolls their dice and pours them out of the bag and pulls aside all the dice that have a 3 on it. And then they put their dice back in there, roll it again for their second roll. Again, removing any of the dice that have 3. And so in the chart, you write down for each player, how many rolls did it take for it to get to having all 5 3s? And so that's that chance. It's going to be different for every player, and there's no way to guarantee you're going to get all 5 3s in one roll. So that's where that chance, that randomness comes in. And so you can play up to 4 games. And if you want to have it as a competition, you can determine whoever has the least number of rolls wins, that kind of thing. So that's really getting that idea of that random value. So that's our unplugged activity for this lesson. And moving on to our guided activity, we're going to be using our CodeJumper kit. We're going to be using play pods, selection pods, the merge pod, and the random plug. And again, that vocabulary for our guided is the random value, a value chosen by chance that we don't know about until it's been generated. Okay, so now we're actually going to go into CodeJumper, and we're going to build a program that has that random selection. So I'm going to switch my camera to CodeJumper app and the CodeJumper.cam so we can see it on the table. So right now I have the hub attached to the selection pod. And from the 2-spoke dial, I have 1 play pod. And from the 3-spoke dial, I also have just 1 play pod there. And you can have up to 4 play pods. You can create a program. You can do it any way you want to for this one. The students can create a program and they can debug it, make sure it's all accurate. And then I'm just going to go play my program. But first, let's run the code.
Thread 1 tools. If 2 is greater than 7, play sawing wood for 1.5 times speed. Else, play sawing metal for 1.5 times speed. And if, end thread.
All right, so now in here, I just have this little program and it says if 2 is greater than 7. Well, let's press play and see what happens. Well, that to me sounds like sawing metal, which was our else, because we know 2 is not greater than 7. But if we were to turn the dial, if we were to manually turn the dials,
1, 8, 7, 6, 7, 8.
Okay, if 8 is greater than 7, let's play. All right, so that one sounded different. That was sawing wood. We manually turned it. But now we have our random plug. So in the kit, we have this plug that's a purple plug, and it has a raised print R on it. And that stands for random. And I'm going to go ahead and insert this into the top of the 2-spoke dial in the selection pod. And we heard that click. Now let's press play and see what happens. All right, that was sawing wood. I'm going to change my sound for the metal one. It's just a little too close. All right, it's very different. We'll do that clanking. Okay, so now I'm going to press it. So we had sawing wood, and our second option is clanking. So now I'm going to press it again. Clanking. So that means if random is greater than 7, then we can ask ourselves, okay, that number we know is that random number has to be greater than 7. And so this option, it has to be 8. Now let's press it again. Okay, we got 8 again. All right. Let's see.
Random.
Okay. I'm going to try the other one. Oh, that's sawing wood. All right. You can just keep pressing it and you eventually get in there. Okay, this isn't working, but this is that random aspect. You might hear the same one again and again and again until it cycles through and then you get a different number. So if it's
6,
a lower number,
5, 4.
Let's see. Oh, if 4 is greater than, then we heard our clanking. So you can you can play around with it and have your students think about, well, if your number that you're choosing that doesn't have the random plug, when do you start seeing that you get more of one or the other in numbers? There's a lot of thinking that can happen here, and they can write their thoughts and ideas down in the their computer science journal or wherever they're taking their notes. So that's our guided activity for this lesson. And next, we're going to move on to our exploration. So I'm going to first talk about it, but then I want to show you a little tip that I've learned when we're demoing programs, when you want to have them built ahead of time. So in this exploration, students will create a story with multiple endings. So we've saw that before in our other lesson, but this time they're going to use that random value. So a random value, that chance from a specified group of values. And then we're going to have to use, we have our play pods, our loop pod, our pause pod, our merge pod. It's different this time than last time. Our selection code card for Helen's story, random selection code card, the second one. And so we have all these options of things to build. But what I'm going to show you right now is I'm going to actually turn to my camera and to my CodeJumper app. And I still have my program I was using before on the table, but I'm just going to unplug it. And I'm actually going to move my hub. Because what I did was I set up my program on its old cutting board ahead of time. So underneath, you can see on the document camera, I have my whole program already put together. Because frequently, if you move your program, dials will change and knobs will change, and then you spend a lot of time trying to debug, whereas it'd be nice to just be able to put it and go. So I actually built it on this cutting board, and then now can easily just put it on the desk, already built, ready to go. So I'm going to plug my program into thread 2. All right. So we have a really complicated program here. So I'm going to walk you through it. So first I have my hub, which is attached to a loop pod, and almost everything you see inside of here, well, everything you see inside of here is actually inside of this loop. But because of the constraints of the camera, it looks kind of messy. So this is why it's really important that we trace our code. So we have our hub to our loop pod, and inside of our loop pod, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 play pods connected to the selection pod. And each spoke of the selection pod has 1 play pod attached to it, which is then attached to the merge pod, which brings that back together. It goes from like a fork in the road to the paths being brought back together to a pause pod closing our loop. So it's a little bit it's a little bit cumbersome to lay all out, but when you have a lot of space, it's easier. But the key is to trace those codes and trace those pods as they go, so you can really see which direction it's going. Okay, so the point of this is we are going to be using our random one again. So we have the random plug, and I'm going to put that into the selection pod in the 2-spoke dial. Okay, so the sound set we're using is Helen's Story, and you can again use any one you want. What's nice about this one, it has the selection options already built into it. They're familiar with it and using for selection pods, so the focus is on the random instead of building the program. But this time we have it built into a loop, and so I'm going to turn the loop number of times we loop
1, 2
to 2 right now, but you can have it up to 8 times. And the code card in the program, in the curriculum, actually says loop it 4 times to see what you can get. But we're going to just loop it 2 times. So again, we have the same story we heard in lesson 10. So I'm going to go press play, and let's just listen and trace the code.
Helen is looking for her friends. She thinks they might be in the haunted house. She opens the door. Her friends jump out and yell, "Surprise!" Helen is looking for her friends. She thinks they might be in the haunted house. She opens the door. Her friends jump out and yell, "Surprise!"
Okay, so that randomly had to go to the same direction both times. But the more you go, you'll see that you'll get both random selections. Again, if you look at your if-else statement, what we have right now is if random is greater than 1. Well, almost everything is going to be 1. So we can change that to
8, 7, 6, 5.
Then we'll have a higher chance of getting the other one. So we'll do it one more time.
Helen is looking for her friends. She thinks they might be in the haunted house. She opens the door. Her friends jump out and yell, "Surprise!" Helen is looking for her friends. She thinks they might be in the haunted house. She opens the door. She sees a ghost and screams.
Okay, so that last time we actually got the other one. So that's where that random comes in, because you may hear it 3 or 4 times. So that's the exploration, and give your students time to just really play with this, do different sound sets, and come up with options to create these fantastic, creative stories that have multiple endings. So thank you for participating in today's lesson, and enjoy Code Jumper.